Hello everyone and welcome to Gurukul Online Learning Network. Today we are going to talk about World School Debating Championships and the specific speaker of the format, the Leader of Opposition. I am Aian Adib, and without further ado, let's get started. Now, the Leader of Opposition is the second speaker of the debate, and as such, you need to remember he or she is also very important to this debate. Now, the second speaker has a lot of power, almost equal to the Prime Minister, but also has a lot of more responsibility, partly because of the fact that the Prime Minister has come in and given their arguments. You need to think and prepare about a rebuttal that the argument spoken about is tackled smartly. So let's get started. First of all, I have talked about characterization, but the Leader of Opposition has the power to change or modify the characterization as well. Now, in Asian parliamentary debates, you can see a lot of people coming in and challenging the characterization. This is not that present in WSDC, but it is also possible to do it with certain restrictions. Do make sure that you are not coming in and blatantly saying that we do not accept their characterization. We will give our own characterization. Now, that is also viable if the fact that they have strawman or squirreled. So, strawman or squirrel, I will explain it again. Strawman or squirreling is making it so that the characterization is taken to such a specific point that it cannot be debated upon. So with the example that I have given, this house will provide free education to children of freedom fighters. They cannot come in and say that we are going to talk about the freedom fighters or the Bishreshtos only. You need to come in and say that this argument, this characterization has been strawmanned, and we cannot necessarily have a debate on this. We need to give a new characterization. That is recharacterization only if required. If not required, you could also take the characterization into your own hand and modify it. So if they have given us the characterization that we are going to talk about Bangladesh's freedom fighter, you can come in and say that Bangladesh's freedom fighters aren't the only freedom fighters that we need to talk about. We also need to talk about different freedom fighters from different countries during their war. And as such, you have come in and modified the characterization. Remember that if the characterization is general, do make sure that you do not modify it. If it goes in your favor, that's very great. But if it is such that it is restricting your arguments to the point that you cannot even talk about it, come in and modify it or recharacterize it if required. So, modify or recharacterize. Do not strawman or squirrel. Even the Leader of Opposition cannot come in and strawman the debate. You cannot come in and say that their general idea of the freedom fighters is a very vague term. You need to come in and accept it if it's a good characterization. If you come in and say that this is a very vague term and we cannot talk about this, we need to talk about a much more precise date and precise event, then that is also strawmanning. So you cannot come in and strawman the debate. Remember that. That takes a lot of point out of your debate and may even make you lose the debate as a whole. So this is very, very important. As such, I have marked it in red. Do not strawman or squirrel. Second, re-identify the stakeholders only if required. Again, this is only if, due to the fact that if they have given the proper stakeholders, if the stakeholders play into your arguments, you do not have to come in and re-identify the stakeholders. For example, if they come in and talk about only the Bishreshtos are the stakeholders here, you can come in and say that, no, the Bishreshtos aren't the only stakeholders. We are going to talk about the whole freedom fighters as a general. And that's a much better stakeholder than them strawmanning that stakeholder as well. So make sure you come in and talk about your arguments. Again, stakeholders are a very flexible thing. Even if you think that the stakeholders provided by the government aren't playing into your arguments, you can come in and add your stakeholders, saying that, okay, the government has only talked about freedom fighters as the stakeholder, but we think the general people should also be a stakeholder, as they are not getting the free education that they also deserve. So here you have come in and added a stakeholder, the general people of the country, and as such your arguments have to also cover the general people of the country, and as such you can re-identify the stakeholders, or you can come in, modify the stakeholders, even add to them. So make sure you are doing it only if required, because again, if you come in and just blatantly say that we do not take their stakeholder, the adjudicator will be very displeased with you, because you are just coming in and not even giving them a platform to debate upon. You are just coming in and telling their arguments don't work. Make sure there's a proper debate. Make sure the debate is going out smoothly, and make sure you are doing it properly. Do not come in and just say that their arguments are invalid and we won't accept them. Third, the opposition also has to set a burden. Why do we say this? Because in general, in debates, you are trying to win, right? So the Prime Minister may come in and give you a very unjustified burden, saying that this is something that they have to prove in order to do it, when it's not even in the debate. If you come in and say that the burden they have set on us is very massive and cannot be proven by just this context, you need to come in and set a burden on yourself. You can come in, give your own burden, and then say a counter burden to them. Yes, even as the leader of opposition, you have to set a burden on the government. So if the government comes in and gives like 3 criteria as the burden they will cover to prove it, you can say that the criteria aren't exactly the best to follow. You can give them a new criteria that they have to follow and they have to prove. And as such, you can also give yourself a new criteria to make sure your arguments are much more driven towards the debate itself. Again, notice that I am constantly mentioning your arguments. You need to make sure your arguments are the top priority and are getting the best priority as a whole. So make sure your burdens that you have set isn't something that goes against your arguments, or your arguments aren't even taking the burden into account. So do that. Make sure your burden aligns with your arguments, and the arguments in the end will link back to the motion and the burden that you have set yourself. Now, what does this do? Why is this burden such important? Because after the adjudicator has heard the burden set upon you by the government, they will think that, all right, will the opposition take that burden, or will they give a burden in itself? Now, when you both have given a burden, the adjudicator will think which burden is the more important one to me. So if someone comes in and talks about this very specific event during the Freedom War, or the general idea that we shouldn't give free education to just these people. So here you can see that this general idea of not giving this few people the privilege is a much more important burden than saying how this specific event relates to us giving this free education to these specific people. So remember, burdens are very important. Next, just like the Prime Minister, you need to give a general overview of the debate. Now, this is important in the leader of opposition because of the fact that there has been an argument or 2 arguments that have been spoken. So, the leader of opposition also has the burden of rebutting the arguments that have been given by the Prime Minister. So, make sure you are rebutting the arguments given by the Prime Minister, and make sure you have given a proper rebuttal to it. So here the thing comes into play that leader of opposition has a little less time than Prime Minister, due to the fact that they have to rebut this argument provided. The Prime Minister can just come in and provide their arguments, but the Leader of Opposition has to come in, give the characterization, recharacterize if possible, identify the stakeholders, give a burden, and then give this general overview of the debate. They also have to rebut the argument. So make sure you are giving that this rebuttal we are going to talk about is how we take their argument out of the debate. So make sure you are also talking about rebuttals during this general overview of the debate. So Leader of Opposition also has to allocate these duties to the speaker. So make sure you are talking, if due to the time management, you cannot give the whole rebuttal, make sure you also allocate that to your deputy. So if you're coming in and talking about a rebuttal that has multiple layers to it, we will talk about arguments, layers, rebuttal layers much more in depth. But for now, if you're thinking that, all right, so I have this rebuttal, there are 4 layers to it, but I can only talk about 2 layers. Make sure you tell the adjudicator that the other 2 layers are going to be spoken by your deputy. So with that, the adjudicator can think that, all right, so this rebuttal that they have provided will be covered by the deputy too. And as the Prime Minister has done, you need to allocate the arguments to the deputies as well. So if you have 3 arguments, you need to come in and say that I will talk about this argument and my deputy will come and talk about the other 2 arguments. And yes, do remember that since your time is also short, if you want to focus completely on rebuttal, you can choose to not give an argument, but I would suggest not to do it. I would suggest at least talk about the argument so the adjudicator has a proper understanding of what to expect. This is also something that should be remembered. If you don't talk about an argument and if you don't allocate the argument to your deputy, if your deputy comes in and talks about a completely new argument that you haven't mentioned, the edge will look down upon it. They will think that where has this argument come upon? But that doesn't mean that they won't take it into account. But if you have talked about it, they will see it in a much better light. And as such, you should come in and give your arguments. Your arguments should be solid and allocated properly to your deputies. And as such, remember, this is a very big burden on both the first speakers of their team. As such, as I've mentioned, provide arguments. Do provide your arguments. And with this argument, remember to rebut. Come in, talk about all the characterization, give them proper burdens, and then give them a rebuttal, then provide arguments. Because if you keep that rebuttal for a later date, the argument may be taken up by the deputy and fleshed out to a much better place. The argument that has multiple layers to it, if you haven't rebutted the very core of what they have talked about, the deputy may come in and speak it in a much and add layers to it that you have to then rebut the whole layer, and the deputy gets a much bigger task at hand. So make sure your deputy isn't coming in and having a much bigger burden than they are allocated. That is the role of you as the first speaker of the debate. And lastly, summarize. This is very important to the debate. I would suggest keep the last minute to summarize your debate. Last minute or 30 seconds. Make sure you have covered whatever you have talked about. Make sure you add to it, because sometimes the judges forget to write it or have missed it. If you come in and summarize it and tell them it again, they may remember, oh, they talked about this, and then write it. So make sure you summarize the debate and link it back to the motion. Link it back, meaning that you're talking about why this is important to the motion and why the ad should think of it in a much higher light than the arguments of the proposition. So a general overview, you need to at first modify the characterization or recharacterize it if required. You can do that to take the debate to your own advantage. Re-identify the stakeholders only if required. You can also do that to take it to your advantage. Set a burden. Do set a burden, because most of the time the debates are the burdens are set unfair because they want to win in the end. In the end, it's a sport and you want to win. So make sure the burdens are in your alignment. Give a general overview of the debate. Make sure you include rebuttals. Allocate the duties to the following speakers. Allocate it to your deputy. Then provide arguments that you are talking about and then summarize it in a concise manner. So what have we learned? We have learned about the roles and structure of the leader of the opposition and how to go about doing it. Make sure, and I repeat, structure is very important to WSDC. So make sure you're following the structure to the core. Thank you, everyone. Make sure to share this video if you liked it. And if you have any questions, leave them in the comment box.